Have you ever heard the expression, this house has good bones? What's that mean? What does it mean when a realtor tells you that the house has good bones? It's the Real Estate Show. Welcome to the Real Estate Show. My name is Rick Naples, the owner-broker of Zone Realty LLC. You zone your home. Let's talk about this term, good bones. What does it mean when someone says a house has good bones? Well, it can mean a number of different things, and we're going to look at that here on the Real Estate Show. First of all, the term good bones indicates that you're talking about something that has a good, solid structure. And when it comes to a house, we're talking about the house sitting on a good, solid foundation, that the floors and the walls are level, and that the house overall has a good structure to it. It can also mean that the home presents itself in such a way where it has a really nice design. Not only is the structure really solid, but the home itself has a nice flow. It's easy to walk through. The rooms are open and there's room to breathe in the rooms. They're not all small, little cramped rooms with little pathways that connect them all together. It can also mean the amount of light that comes into the house naturally. Does the house feel like it's in good, healthy condition? Just like the human body might be. Good bones. It's an interesting term. It can also mean a number of other different things. I put together a presentation that talks about what good bones are in a home. Let's take a look, and then I'll be back after to talk a little bit more about the term good bones. I'm filming today from the Zone office in Plainville, Connecticut, and we're talking about good bones when it comes to a house. One of the things you saw in that presentation that fits kind of under that term is the architectural features of a home. You know, when I go into older homes, I'm also amazed at the craftsmanship that was put into those homes back in the day when they were put together. The specific custom built-ins in certain rooms, the architectural details, you know, as far as the casings around the doors and the windows, or interesting archways, stained glass windows, and so on and so forth, that older homes present that would be very hard to duplicate or redo in today's costs with today's techniques. Not to say that you can't do them, but it would be very expensive. Those all give the appeal of a home that has good solid bones. One of the things that I mention a lot to my buyers is when you're going into an older home is bring a small little ball or a little marble with you. The idea is when you enter into the home and you're going into the living room area or the kitchen where you have a smooth floor, this is an uncarpeted floor, to place that ball or that marble down on the floor and see if it stays put. If it begins to roll in any specific direction, that gives you an indication that the house is leaning or sagging to one way or another, and there could be an underlying structural issue. It could also mean something simple, that there's a little dip in the floor, which is not a big deal. So you want to go down into the basement and take a look underneath. Let's speak about the basement for a minute. The basement is interesting because it's kind of an x-ray of the house itself. It's what holds up the house. This is the foundation area. When you're walking through an unfinished basement, you get to see what the house is actually sitting on, what kind of foundation is supporting the house, what kind of beams support the center of the house, what kind of poles are holding up that beam, and so on and so forth. Very important to take a look at that stuff because if it's in bad shape, it could mean you have some structural issues that you're going to have to deal with. One of the other things that you can do that's visual is when you go into a home, look at the doors, especially doors that are closed. Look at the gap at the bottom of the door and the gap at the top of the door. Are they even, or do you see that they're off from one side to the other? Again, that could be an indication that there's some sagging issues as far as the older home is concerned. And the same is true when you're looking at windows. So there's a lot of good indications. One thing that a realtor will be looking for when they're saying that a house has good bones is not only the overall structure and the feel and design of the home, but how is the home topped? In other words, what's that roof like? Is the roof good and solid, or is there sagging or leaking issues? And they're also going to look at the plumbing of the house itself. Plumbing is really important because if the plumbing is out of date, it might not be able to provide for the new owner when the new owner is moving into the home. That furnace is really important, folks, because if you got to replace an old furnace, there's a big expense that could eat at your budget pretty quickly. You're going to also look at how the house is insulated. One of the ways to do that is to go up and peek in the attic. See what kind of insulation is up there. Is the floor of the attic insulated to stop heat from escaping through the attic way and into the air? So that's another thing that you can take a look at. Good bones means a number of different things, and realtors don't use that term lightly. It's only used on those homes that give an overall sense that they have a good, solid structure. But again, the recommendation is, if you're buying an older home, might be worth having a structural engineer take a look at the house to give you that confidence that it does truly have good bones and that your money is going to be spent basically on doing cosmetic renovations as opposed to structural ones. Let's take a look at this presentation. We'll be back with more thoughts on good bones. when talking about a house having good bones, as I said, you're talking about a number of different things. You know, it's funny because there are a lot of houses that sit and they've been there for years, and sometimes they fall under the category, we call them ugly houses. The house doesn't really have the appeal to a wide range of people. Maybe it's a little bit out of date, or it seems a little bit out of place, or it looks like it's a run-down residential home that hasn't had a lot of care given to it over the years. Doesn't necessarily mean that that ugly house is not going to be a great buy and has some good potential. What it does mean is it does take a keen eye to look at that home and see what its potential, what its transformation can be if you were to purchase that home. So when you go into it, does it have a good structure? Does it have good bones? I promote here on the Real Estate Show, as well as with all my buyer clients, that it's really important when you're going to purchase a home of doing a home inspection. An inspector is going to spend a lot of time in the house, and they, with their professional eye, is going to see things that you may not see. You know, there's an old saying that says, don't judge a book by its cover. And I'm sure a lot of you out there have bought a book that looked like it was going to be interesting, and then you start reading it, and it's like, wow, this is kind of sorry I purchased this book. It's the same thing with some of those television shows. We see all this hype that the show is going to be a great show, and turns out the whole commercial basically was the only parts that were worth watching. The show itself was not that great. So when you're looking at a house, it can be the same way. You may look at the house and say, ugh, you know, this isn't a great looking house. It needs a lot of work. But it could have a good structure to it. It could have good bones. And there's a lot of great things you can do with these older houses if it's just cosmetic updates that need to be done. But you do want to get other eyes on it. So if you do buy an older home, or a so-called ugly house, you do want to have a home inspector go through it, because they'll spend the time in the home with you, 2-3 hours of time, to actually go through the house from top to bottom. And their trained eye can see things that you might not necessarily see right away. Now let's talk about, when you're looking at the bones of the house, what happens if you're purchasing a home and all the spaces in the home are finished. In other words, the basement is finished, and you can't, like I said during the and you can't see what's down there in the basement. You can't see the center beams or how the house is held up, or the foundation, because it's all covered cosmetically. Well, that makes it a little bit more of a challenge, because again, you're going to have to look at other things throughout the house to determine if its structure is good and solid. So you're going to rely on a home inspector, or as I said, a structural engineer to come in and determine how that house is sitting and whether or not it does have good bones. So good bones, something to consider when you're looking at a house. I'm talking here on the real estate show about the term good bones when it comes to describing a house. One of the other things that you want to look at when you're thinking if a house has good bones is its location. You know, in real estate, we're always talking about location of the home. And that's the overall presentation of the house to the street. In other words, its curb appeal. How does the house sit on the land that it's on? Does it look like it's sitting in a little bit of a valley? In other words, is the surrounding yard higher than where the house actually is? Because this could be a water problem. You know, water runs downhill, so you could have flooding in the basement during high rains. Or is it the opposite? Does the house sit up on a hill? That can cause some additional problems as far as just basic access to the house if it's sitting up on the top of a hill. So location can be part of this whole terminology of whether or not a house has good bones. We all look at a number of different houses every single year as realtors, and we're in and out of a lot of different designs. We're in and out of new construction, we're in and out of houses that are older, some houses 100 years older, some houses medium age, 25, 30 years old. We get to see a lot of houses because this is the business. We're going in and out of a lot of houses. So we get a really good sense when we walk into the home of whether or not a house has good structural soundness to it or good bones. So when your realtor says to you, this house has good bones, they're talking from experience. But I recommend that if you are buying an older home and you have any concerns about the structural situation of the house, you might want to hire a structural engineer, someone who's an expert in the structure and the bones of a home, to go through it and give you that yay or nay as far as the overall condition is concerned. Let's take a look at this presentation, and I'll be back with a section of the show I call the Real Estate Mailbag. This is the portion of the real estate show I call the Real Estate Mailbag. My opportunity to address questions sent to me here at the Real Estate Show, or sometimes just a commentary on something that I was talking about to someone when I was out and about in the general public. I recently was talking to a gentleman that had purchased an older home, something that falls under the category of an antique home. And those are houses that are 100 years plus old. And he was telling me the story that down in the basement, they used tree trunks to hold up the house. Whoever built the house at that time used whatever they could find for wood and scrap pieces. They cut local trees down, and to support the house, they used the trunk of the trees to hold up the house. And it's been that way for 100 years. And my question to him was, well, how does that affect the house structurally? Are they good solid wood beams? He said, yeah. He said the floors are uniquely level. He says there's no sagging in the ceilings or the walls. Probably going to be good for another 100 years. His concern was whether he should pull those out and put in metal poles. And it was kind of like, well, hey, if they've been working for 100 years, maybe you just leave them alone and you don't go through that expense. My name is Rick Naples. This has been the Real Estate Show. I thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.